A farm boy saw the future while plowing dirt and changed how billions see the world. But history forgot his name. Picture this. It's 1940, a typical American living room on a Tuesday evening. The family gathers around a wooden box sitting on the mantel. Dad adjusts the dial. Static crackles. Then a voice fills the room. President Roosevelt delivering another fireside chat. Mom sits in her chair, knitting. The kids sprawl on the carpet, eyes closed, imagining the story unfolding from the shadow. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The announcer asks. They can only hear. They cannot see. This was America in 1940. Over 80% of homes had a radio. It was the golden age of radio. Families planned their evenings around broadcast schedules. Amos and Andy at 7, Fibber McGee and Molly at 8, the Lone Ranger for the kids, news bulletins about the war in Europe, baseball games called play-by-play, Jack Benny making the nation laugh without a single image. Just voices, just sound waves traveling through the air into living rooms across the country. The radio was the electronic hearth. It brought the world into your home. But you had to imagine everything. The faces, the places, the action. Your mind did all the work. And people loved it. They gathered around that box like their grandparents had gathered around the fireplace. It was connection. It was entertainment. It was the center of American life. But here's what most people didn't know. While America sat in the dark listening to voices, one invention was about to shatter that world completely. And it didn't start in a corporate laboratory in New York or a university research facility. It started in the mind of a 14-year-old boy plowing a field in rural Idaho. Television existed in 1940, technically, but barely. It was an expensive curiosity, a toy for the rich. Experimental broadcasts in a few major cities. Clunky mechanical systems with spinning discs and terrible picture quality. By 1946, there were only a few thousand television sets in the entire United States. Most people had never seen one. The technology seemed decades away from being practical. Radio was king. Television was a distant dream. So how did we get from voices to visions? How did we go from 80% of homes having radios in 1940 to 87% having televisions by 1960? The answer involves a genius nobody remembers, a corporate giant that tried to steal his invention, and one of the most important legal battles in American technological history. His name was Philo Taylor Farnsworth, and this is the story of how a farm boy invented the future and then watched the world forget he ever existed. Philo Farnsworth was born on August 19, 1906, in a log cabin near Beaver, Utah. No electricity, no running water. His family were Mormon pioneers trying to make a living from the land. When Philo was 11, the family moved to a farm near Rigby, Idaho. It was here that everything changed. The farm had electricity. For young Philo, this was magic. While other kids played in the fields, he devoured science magazines. He studied electrical diagrams. He took apart motors and put them back together. When he found an old hand-cranked washing machine in the attic, he converted it to run on electric power. His mother was amazed. His father thought he was wasting time. But Philo was obsessed. He wanted to understand how electricity worked. He wanted to know what else it could do. He read about something called television. Scientists in Europe and America were trying to transmit images through the air, just like radio transmitted sound. But the systems were all mechanical. They used spinning discs with holes punched in them. A light would shine through the holes as the disc spun, scanning an image line by line. On the receiving end, another spinning disc would recreate the image. It was clunky. The picture quality was terrible. The discs had to spin in perfect synchronization or the image would fall apart. And there was a fundamental limit to how good the picture could ever be. You could only punch so many holes in a disc. Philo thought there had to be a better way. He was 14 years old, working in the fields when it hit him. It was 1921. He was behind a horse-drawn harrow, plowing the potato field. Back and forth, straight parallel lines across the dirt. He looked behind him at the furrows he'd made, perfectly straight, perfectly parallel, row after row after row, and then he saw it. The solution. What if you could capture light the same way? What if instead of a spinning disc you could scan an image electronically? Line by line, row by row, Just like plowing a field, you could use electrons. A beam of electrons scanning back and forth across a screen. No moving parts, pure electronics. It would be faster, cleaner, better. He ran home. He couldn't stop thinking about it. He drew diagrams. He worked out the physics. He knew it would work. He just knew it. The next day at Rigby High School, he approached his chemistry teacher, Justin Tolman. Tolman was young, enthusiastic, one of the few people in town who might understand what Philo was talking about. Philo asked if he could explain an idea. Tolman said sure. Philo walked to the blackboard and started drawing. He drew a vacuum tube. He drew an electron gun that would shoot a beam of electrons. He drew a screen coated with phosphor that would glow when the electrons hit it. He explained how you could deflect the electron beam with magnetic fields, making it scan back and forth across the screen in horizontal lines. He explained how you could vary the intensity of the beam to create light and dark spots. He explained how you could do this fast enough that the human eye would see a complete image instead of individual lines. Tolman stared at the board. He didn't fully understand the physics, but he understood that this kid had just invented something. He told Philo to keep working on it, and then he did something that would change history. He copied the drawing into his notebook. He dated it. He kept it. That drawing would later become the most important piece of evidence in a patent war that would determine who owned the future of television. But in 1921, Philo was just a farm kid with an idea. He had no money, no connections, no way to build what he'd imagined. He finished high school. His father died. The family struggled. Philo took odd jobs. He went to Brigham Young University for a year but couldn't afford to continue. He worked as a street sweeper. He drove a truck. He married his high school sweetheart, Elma Gardner, who everyone called Pem. And through it all, he kept thinking about television. He knew his electronic system would work. He knew it was better than the mechanical systems everyone else was developing. He just needed a chance to prove it. In 1926, that chance came. He met two California businessmen, George Everson and Leslie Gorell. He explained his idea. He showed them his drawings. He convinced them that electronic television was the future. They gave him $6,000. In today's money, that's about $100,000. It was enough to start. Philo moved to San Francisco. He rented a small laboratory at 202 Green Street. He brought Pem. He brought his brother-in-law, Cliff Gardner, to help with the technical work. And he got to work building the impossible. He called his invention the image dissector. It was a vacuum tube with a photoelectric plate on one end. Light from the scene you wanted to transmit would hit the plate. The light would knock electrons loose from the plate in proportion to the brightness of the light. Then, an electron beam would scan across the plate, line by line, picking up the pattern of electrons. That pattern would be amplified and transmitted as a signal. On the receiving end, another tube would reverse the process, recreating the image on a phosphor screen. No spinning disks, no mechanical parts. Pure electronics. But would it work? That was the question. Philo spent months building and testing. He ran out of money. He convinced his investors to give him more. He kept working. And then, on September 7th, 1927, everything came together. Cliff Gardner was in one room with the image dissector camera. Philo was in another room with the receiver. They decided to start simple. They made a slide with a single straight line painted on glass. Cliff put the slide in front of the camera. Philo stared at the receiver screen, and there it was, a straight line, glowing on the screen, transmitted electronically from one room to another. No wires connecting them, just the signal. Philo's heart was pounding. He called out to Cliff, "Rotate the slide 90 degrees." Cliff rotated it. On the screen, the line rotated, 90 degrees. It worked. It actually worked. Philo Taylor Farnsworth, at 21 years old, had just transmitted the first all-electronic television image in history. The image dissector worked. Electronic television was real. The future had arrived. Over the next months, Philo improved the system. He transmitted more complex images. He demonstrated it to his investors. At one point, to please them, he transmitted an image of a dollar sign. The investors loved it. They gave him more money. He filed for patents. On January 7th, 1927, he filed the patent for his television system. On August 26, 1930, He was granted patent number 1,173,980. It covered the fundamental principles of electronic television. Philo started doing public demonstrations. In 1928 and 1929, he showed his system to reporters and scientists. The press called him a genius. The scientific community was amazed. Here was a kid with no formal engineering degree who had solved the problem that had stumped the best minds in the world. Electronic television wasn't just possible. It was here, but Philo had a problem. A big problem. His name was David Sarnoff. David Sarnoff was the head of the Radio Corporation of America, RCA. He was one of the most powerful men in American media. RCA controlled the patents for radio. They dominated broadcasting. And Sarnoff had decided that television was going to be the next big thing. He wanted RCA to own it. All of it. RCA had been working on television for years. They'd been developing mechanical systems. They'd acquired patents from other inventors. They had an army of engineers working in corporate laboratories. They had money, they had political connections. They had everything, except they didn't have the best technology. Philo Farnsworth did. In 1930, Sarnoff sent one of his top engineers to visit Farnsworth's lab. His name was Vladimir Zworykin. He was a Russian immigrant, a brilliant scientist, and he was working on his own television system for RCA. Zworykin asked if he could see Farnsworth's setup. Philo, naive and excited to share his work with a fellow scientist, said yes. Zworykin spent 3 days in Farnsworth's laboratory. He examined everything. He asked detailed questions. He took notes. When he returned to RCA, he reported back to Sarnoff. His exact words, according to later testimony, were, "Farnsworth has 1,000 patents ahead of us." Sarnoff realized he had a problem. This farm boy from Idaho had beaten RCA to the punch. His technology was better. His patents were solid. If RCA wanted to make electronic television, they would have to pay Farnsworth royalties. And RCA had never paid royalties to anyone. Ever. They owned the technology. Other people paid them. So Sarnoff decided to destroy Philo Farnsworth. First, RCA tried to buy him out. They offered to hire him as an employee. Philo refused. He wanted to be a partner, not an employee. He wanted his name on the invention. RCA said no, so Philo said no. Then RCA started developing their own electronic television system, based heavily on what Zworykin had seen in Farnsworth's lab. They filed their own patents. They started doing their own demonstrations. And then they did something that would define the next decade of Philo's life. They challenged his patents. In 1934, the patent interference case began. RCA claimed that Zworykin had invented electronic television first. They pointed to a patent Zworykin had filed in 1923, 4 years before Farnsworth's first successful transmission. If Zworykin had invented it first, then Farnsworth's patents were invalid. RCA would own television. Farnsworth would get nothing. The case went to the patent office. It was a legal war. RCA had unlimited resources. They had teams of lawyers. They had political influence. Farnsworth had a small legal team and his own testimony. It looked hopeless. But then Farnsworth's lawyers did something brilliant. They tracked down Justin Tolman, the high school chemistry teacher from Rigby, Idaho, the man who had watched a 14-year-old boy draw a television system on a blackboard in 1922. Tolman came to Washington. He brought his notebook. He testified under oath. He showed the drawing Philo had made 13 years earlier. He explained how Philo had described the entire system, line by line, electron by electron, before Zworykin had filed his 1923 patent. And more importantly, he pointed out something crucial about Zworykin's 1923 patent. It described a mechanical system, not an electronic one. Zworykin hadn't figured out electronic television in 1923. Philo had figured it out in 1922. The patent office reviewed the evidence. In 1935, they ruled in Farnsworth's favor. His patents were valid. He had invented electronic television. RCA had lost. It should have been Philo's greatest triumph. He had beaten the biggest corporation in America. He had proven that a farm boy with an idea could defeat an army of corporate engineers. His name should have been celebrated. He should have become rich and famous. But that's not what happened. RCA refused to pay royalties. They kept fighting. They filed appeals. They dragged the case out for years. They used their media power to promote Zworykin and Sarnoff as the inventors of television. They controlled the narrative. When newspapers wrote about television, they quoted Sarnoff. When magazines showed pictures of television, they showed RCA's equipment. Farnsworth's name was barely mentioned. Finally, in 1939, RCA gave up. They signed a licensing agreement with Farnsworth. They agreed to pay him royalties. $1 million over 10 years. It was the first time in RCA's history that they had paid another inventor for patent rights. It was a victory, but it was a hollow victory. Because by 1939, the world was about to change in a way that would destroy Philo's chance at recognition forever. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. World War II began. By 1941, America was in the war, and television development stopped. The government ordered all television production halted. The factories that would have made TV sets were converted to make radar equipment and military electronics. The engineers who would have improved television were working on weapons systems. The broadcasts that would have brought television into American homes were shut down. Philo Farnsworth spent the war years working on military contracts. He developed radar technology. He worked on night vision systems. He contributed to the war effort. But his television patents were ticking away. Patents only last 17 years. He'd filed his key patents in 1927 and 1930. By the time the war ended in 1945, those patents were expiring. And when television finally exploded into American homes in the late 1940s and 1950s, Philo Farnsworth no longer owned the technology. RCA didn't have to pay him anymore. They were free to manufacture televisions using his principles without giving him a cent. And they did. Massively. In 1948, only 1% of American homes had a television. By 1950, 9% had one. By 1955, 64% had one. By 1960, 87% of American homes had a television set. The medium that had been a curiosity in 1940 had become the dominant force in American culture. Television changed everything. How we got our news, how we were entertained, how we understood the world, how we elected presidents, how we saw ourselves. And the man who made it possible was forgotten. RCA's marketing machine made sure of that. At the 1939 World's Fair in New York, RCA showcased television as their invention. David Sarnoff stood in front of cameras and declared that RCA had brought television to America. The newspapers called him a visionary. Zworykin was celebrated as the inventor. Farnsworth's name was nowhere to be found. The irony was crushing. Philo had spent his entire adult life working toward this moment, the moment when television would transform society, when families would gather around a screen instead of a radio, when the world would become visible instead of just audible. He had imagined this future when he was 14 years old. He had built the technology to make it happen. He had fought the most powerful corporation in America and won in court. And now, as his invention reshaped civilization itself, he was invisible. Philo continued inventing. He accumulated over 100 patents in his lifetime. He worked on nuclear fusion. He developed new vacuum tubes. He started companies that failed. He struggled with depression. He drank. He felt betrayed by the industry he had created. He watched television become the most important invention of the 20th century, and he watched other men take credit for it. The bitterness ate at him. He would sit in his home watching television programs, knowing that every single image on that screen was possible because of the system he had invented in a San Francisco laboratory decades earlier. But the credits never mentioned his name. The history books gave credit to RCA. The public thought David Sarnoff was the father of television. Philo was a footnote, if he was mentioned at all. His wife Pem watched him deteriorate. She had been there from the beginning. She had believed in him when he was just a farm boy with a crazy idea. She had supported him through the years of poverty and struggle. She had celebrated with him when the image dissector finally worked. She had stood by him through the patent wars. And now she watched as the world enjoyed his invention without knowing his name. In 1957, something happened that perfectly captured the absurdity of Philo's situation. He was invited to appear on a television game show called I've Got a Secret. The premise was simple. Contestants had a secret, and a panel of celebrities tried to guess what it was. Philo's secret was, I invented electronic television. Think about that for a moment. The man who invented the device that was broadcasting the show appeared on that device, and his secret was that he had invented it. The panel of celebrities who made their living appearing on television had no idea who he was. They asked him questions. They made guesses. They were completely stumped. One panelist asked what he did for a living. Philo said he was an inventor. The panelist asked if he'd invented something important. Philo smiled sadly and said yes. They never guessed. The audience laughed. It was entertainment. The man who invented the device they were watching him on was a punchline. He walked off that stage with $200 in prize money. That was his reward. $200 for inventing television. But there was one moment near the end of his life when Philo felt that maybe it had all been worth it. On July 20th, 1969, he sat in his living room with Pem. He turned on the television, and he watched Neil Armstrong step onto the surface of the moon. Live. Transmitted from space 240,000 miles away. Broadcast to 600 million people around the world simultaneously. All of it made possible by the technology Philo had invented in a San Francisco laboratory 42 years earlier. He watched Armstrong's boot touch the lunar surface. He watched the astronaut plant the American flag. He watched humanity take its first steps on another world. And for the first time in decades, he felt something other than bitterness. He felt pride. He felt vindication. Not because anyone was giving him credit, but because his invention had enabled this moment. This impossible, beautiful, historic moment. Pem asked him if it had been worth it. All the struggle, all the pain, all the years of being forgotten, all the battles with RCA, all the patents that expired, all the money he never made, all the recognition he never received. Was it worth it? Philo watched the screen. He watched a human being walking on another world. 600 million people were watching the same image at the same time. They were seeing something that had never happened before in human history. And they were seeing it because of him. Because a 14-year-old farm boy had looked at the furrows in a field and imagined a better way to transmit light. He turned to Pem, and he said yes, it had been worth it. Philo Taylor Farnsworth died on March 11, 1971. He was 64 years old. His obituary in the New York Times was short. Most people had never heard of him. The world moved on, but his invention didn't. Television continued to evolve. The image dissector was replaced by better camera tubes. The cathode ray tubes were replaced by transistors. The analog signals were replaced by digital. The bulky sets were replaced by flat panels. The broadcasts were replaced by cable, then by streaming. But the fundamental principle remained the same. Electronic scanning, line by line. Just like plowing a field. The idea a 14-year-old boy had in 1921 is still the basis of every screen you look at today. Your television, your computer monitor, your smartphone, your tablet. All of them work on the same basic principle Philo Farnsworth invented. They scan images electronically, line by line, faster than your eye can perceive, creating the illusion of a complete picture. The technology has improved. The resolution has increased. The screens have gotten thinner. But the core idea is his. Billions of people look at screens every day. They watch television. They browse the internet. They video chat with family across the world. They see things happening in real time on the other side of the planet. They take for granted that they can see anything, anytime, anywhere. And almost none of them know the name of the man who made it possible. In 1983, 12 years after his death, Philo Farnsworth was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. In 1990, the state of Utah placed a statue of him in the United States Capitol, one of 2 statues representing the state. In 2002, Time magazine named him one of the 100 most important people of the 20th century. Historians and engineers know his name. Museums display his inventions. But ask a random person on the street who invented television, and they'll probably say they don't know. Or they'll say RCA. Or they'll say some other name they half remember. They won't say Philo Farnsworth. That's the price of being ahead of your time. That's what happens when you're a genius without a corporation behind you. That's how history gets written. Not by the people who do the work, but by the people who control the story. David Sarnoff became a legend. He was celebrated as a titan of American industry. He died wealthy and famous. Vladimir Zworykin was honored as a great inventor. He received awards and recognition. RCA became one of the most powerful corporations in America, and Philo Farnsworth died in relative obscurity, known only to specialists and historians. But here's the thing. The truth doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient. The facts don't change just because they're ignored. Philo Farnsworth invented electronic television. He did it when he was 21 years old. He did it in a small laboratory with limited resources. He beat the biggest corporation in America in a patent fight. He changed the world more than almost any other inventor of the 20th century. And the fact that most people don't know his name doesn't change any of that. In 1940, America heard voices. Families gathered around radios and imagined the world. By 1960, they saw the world. They watched it unfold in their living rooms. The transition from sound to vision, from radio to television, was one of the most profound technological shifts in human history. It changed politics. It changed culture. It changed how we understand reality itself. And it happened because a 14-year-old boy looked at the furrows in a field and imagined a better way to transmit light. That boy's name was Philo Taylor Farnsworth. You should remember it, because every time you look at a screen, you're looking through his eyes. Every time you watch a video, you're using his invention. Every time you see the world through electronic media, you're experiencing the vision he had while plowing a field in Idaho more than 100 years ago. He died without the recognition he deserved, but his invention lives on, in every screen, in every pixel, in every image transmitted electronically anywhere in the world. The farm boy who saw the future is gone, but the future he saw is everywhere. And maybe, just maybe, it's time we remembered his name. If you found this story fascinating, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more hidden histories like this. Leave a like if you think Philo Farnsworth deserves to be remembered, and drop a comment telling us, what other forgotten inventors should we cover next?